All right, welcome everyone. So to the second EAIR forum on the Myanmar crisis. And this time we are collaborating again with IKMAS, the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies based in UKM, National University of Malaysia. So we have with us today Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Albar, the former Foreign Minister of Malaysia, and also the Director of IKMAS, Professor Dr. Sufyan Jusof, and also UMNO Youth Exco in International Affairs, Mr. Iqmal Haslan, Iqmal Hisham. So we are very glad to have this lineup of speakers to join us today to talk about Myanmar crisis and the ASEAN dilemma. So Tan Sri Syed Hamid Albar, as the former Foreign Minister and as the Defense Minister, and also was appointed as the Home Minister later, would have a lot of thought about this topic. Professor Dr. Sufyan has been personally involved in some of the activities in Myanmar, and also from the international affair, the voice from youth, we would like to hear from the different perspective from the Malaysian speakers about this very important international issues. Also, Salam Ramadan to all the Muslim audience. And to inform all of you, this would be recorded, but we will uphold the Chatham House rules. So which means you are open to talk about the issues as candid as you like. And the recording will not be uploaded publicly. If you need any parts of this, you may request from IKMAS, and we will ask the speaker's permission before we share further information about this. So without further ado, each speaker will be invited to speak for 10 minutes. So first up, Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Albar, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair or Moderator, for giving me the floor and to be the first speaker. Let me begin by thanking the organizer, EAIR and IKMAS, for inviting me to take part in this very current and topical subject. It's Myanmar crisis and ASEAN's dilemma. I think we are another addition to the many discourses that have been going on since February 1st in respect of Myanmar. So let me also, at this point of time, to take this opportunity to share my thought and ideas. I will divide what I'm going to see first in the to state maybe something that is obvious, but and repeat of what you already know. Then I will go, and after that I will go to the issues. Then I will do my conclusion and recommendation. So that's what I'm going to do. As we all know, Myanmar became a member of ASEAN since July 3rd, 1997. And I think Myanmar became a member of ASEAN actually at the, it's mostly the work of Malaysia, because it was not a popular move. Not a popular move where there was a division within ASEAN, whether Myanmar with its military regime should be invited to in ASEAN or not. But Malaysia push it through. Isolation is no good. We cannot take the Western view of isolating. This is done in the context of, then we can understand the crisis, what the crisis is about. So in 1997, Malaysia pushed it through and we got Myanmar in. The rationale behind this, Malaysia believes in its foreign policy, the isolation or disengagement is not the answer for making a peaceful and secured world. It is better to have constructive engagement. We engage in order to. Our intention, the rationale behind this was that Myanmar, if they join ASEAN, with the dynamics of ASEAN, would change. There was a very strong rationale that it will change. But you know that Myanmar achieved independence in 1948. It is one of the countries in the world when it achieved independence, its union is based on ethnicity. I think generally there is a majority are Buddhist, majority of the people are Burma, that we know. And I think but it was short-lived. UMNO and the New Win overthrew in 1962. We have the military coup, and this military coup, they championed something that I think become the ideology and the philosophy of Myanmar until now, that they can live on their own. No one can interfere with them. They will be okay. They join ASEAN because of the beautiful policy of ASEAN of consensus and non-interference. So that fits in well with the ideology and philosophy of the military. They can do whatever they want in their country, and no one should make comments or remarks about it. So this military, then they tested, experimented on going for democracy by changing uniform. So we have the Tianjin in 2011, they changed to civilian rule, or what the semblance of civilian government, in preparation for a democratic process. And I think all of us were excited. ASEAN was excited, and I think the West was excited. So they had a very good election on 2015. 2015, the election was commended, it was very good, it was supported by every country, and Suu Kyi became the effective leader of Myanmar. But Suu Kyi did not change the Tatmadaw. Tatmadaw still have become the dominant power, but she thought that she would go on because her concern is not on freedom and democracy by then. But we see that her concern was more on political efficacy, how to maintain her power. So then in 2020, when she won, confident, but when she won the election, then the military got a bit fearful, lost some remarks to see that, we are going to change. We are going to, so following the real democratic thing, I will soon go to the issue, but I'm just going quickly. But I would like to underline that all this while, from independence until now, Myanmar has always determined its own narrative. It doesn't follow regional or international narrative. Say, for example, we take the case of Bangladesh, Rohingya in Bangladesh and also I think. The Rohingya, according to the Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, these are the three narratives of Myanmar. And these three narratives are the earlier crises that we didn't tackle. ASEAN didn't tackle, ASEAN couldn't tackle. First of all, when they say Rohingya are Bengalis, nobody dared to dispute with them. Even the Pope, when he visited Myanmar, didn't use the terminology of Rohingya. And then they also decided that they are all terrorists. Rohingya is a terrorist. The reason why they took action, because Rohingya are terrorists, they would want, and that the Rohingya is also a threat to the security and sovereignty of Myanmar. Argument when we want to understand the crisis. So the security and sovereignty of Myanmar is under threat. So if we put this in the context of today, then we can understand their reaction, how they have acted, because they consider now Myanmar, the security and sovereignty are under threat by the civil disobedience movement. So now let me go to the I think I like what Dino Pati wrote. He says that this crisis of September of 1st February is actually a tragedy for ASEAN. It's a tragedy. He uses the word tragedy. The U.S. Secretary of State, says that the work of the Tatmadaw is have introduced or created a reign of terror. I think now Myanmar, we can easily describe, if you want to know the crisis, is a place of violence, injustices, oppression, and terror. That is their main thing. So let me now say what I want to say in few points, in terms of bullet point. I finished my introduction. Let me go to, I'm trying to rush it. So I think since February military coup, they don't call it a military coup. I mean, very clever. They call it emergency. Emergency because of the fraud of the election, even though the election commission in Myanmar deny that. So they say that the situation, since that, the situation has not improved. But we have got voluminous statements and resolutions that say that something must be done. But nothing is done because it's not the words that we want, but the action. So nothing is done. So the situation has deteriorated, with an expert at a recent UN Security Council briefing warning that Myanmar is on the brink of state failure. I think we are all familiar with what a failed state is. And the death rate as today, it's 730, with 50 children have died. And because of the ministry indiscriminate military killings have shot up. And according to, this is according to the writer, an Australian writer in defense analyst, he says that Myanmar has been the most, a country that has never known peace for the last 7 decades. He said the military is so framed up, their psychology is psychology of war. According to you, I tend to agree with. From the moment, if you look at all the crises, they do not get along with all the minorities. They have from 1978 and before, they have done all kind of atrocities and crime against humanity on the Rohingya, and nothing has been done. So they, according to him, this David say, he says that, it's nothing what is happening now is going to worry them. So we can call, they must stop violence, they don't, So whatever death rate is not important. So unlike any time before, now, before, if you can remember, 1988, it was a student demonstration, so many deaths. And then the saffron demonstration in 2007, I think. And, so many were killed. Even the figures of those killed, the data are not accurate. It's more than what is reported or what is made public. So, but this time, the protectors are emboldened. They're emboldened and encouraged, not only by the people who are the NLD, but the ordinary public who have tasted democracies in 2015. They say democracy is not bad, even though it's flawed democracy. It's not bad. We have more freedom, we have more access to internet, we have access to the other parts of the world. So it's good for us. So then you have got the civil disobedience movement joining the ordinary population. But we must remember one thing. I think a lot of people forget that the military is the single most powerful institution in the country. And they have ruled Myanmar for decades. Though this time, they thought that by March, by the celebration, 27 March, when they celebrated the Army Day, the military day, they would be able to form the government complete. But because of this, the non-cooperation of the various sectors of the country in a civil service and also, I think they have problem. And I look at the CPRA say that one of the groups say that they are going to form an army, they're going to form this. Don't forget that Myanmar security apparatus is large, consisting of an army of a claimed 400,000 fighters, most of whom are ethnic Burman. So I think they are Buddhists, and another 80,000 police. Also known number, and also an unknown number of state intelligence. Their intelligence service, I think, is among the best in ASEAN. They not only operate within the country, they operate outside the country. So the armies, if we can get to break the armies, then there is a possibility. The army remains largely united and likely to remain so in the short term. There is no defections, no big defect numbers of. It must be noted that this defection should not be seen, a small number should not be seen as any kind of military defections or will weaken them. So I think the civil disobedience movement's effectiveness is unprecedented. That one, I think we accept that, and it's spreading across key ministries. And due to the large volume of people taking the streets, important is banks have been closed due to lack of staff. International support is insignificant, and more vocal than effective. Myanmar does not, from history, listen to diplomatic statements or anything of that kind. So Western countries and academics have instead opted for a more dynamic ASEAN. This is what just now our Professor Sufyan mentioned about Guterres make a statement asking ASEAN. The more dynamic ASEAN posture and involvement, although they are aware that ASEAN will not adequately meet the challenge, ASEAN, in the first place, I'm sorry to say, I was a foreign minister. I was very active in Myanmar for 3 decades. I was a special envoy of ASEAN at one time to Myanmar because we wanted to make Suu Kyi more honorable. ASEAN, unfortunately, is divided and ineffective. On the one hand, member states like Cambodia and Thailand dismiss the coup as a domestic matter, but there is a difference this time. If you remember, there is always a first time. There was a statement, Brunei, as an ASEAN chair, came out with a statement to call for dialogue and reconciliation, which has never happened before. It will never be agreed. And then the other one that is different is IKMAS met and discussed on the Myanmar crisis and make interventions from various, we have intervention from Thailand, which was quite good. We have intervention from Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia. Thailand, which was quite surprising, but Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, Indonesia, but in IKMAS, Malaysia and Singapore take the lead, and Malaysia and Indonesia take the lead role. So the Philippines now have also expressed a concern about the coup. At one time, Philippines also retrained, and they wanted to have a peaceful. I think everyone wants to have a peaceful one, but is it possible? So international, domestic, of what ASEAN is capable at present, ASEAN not trusted me. Fortunately, by the civil, the protesters, because they think ASEAN is not doing enough. And then there is a move to say that ASEAN should recognize the alternative government, the CPRH, formed by, they have got ministers of it. But you give me a few, for me, otherwise it would not be, so ASEAN cannot make a statement, and they have to call for this summit on the 24th. De facto their government, de jure they may not be recognized and sort of thing, but we have to deal with this type of crisis. So one scholar pointed out that ASEAN states remain more concerned with creating a unified position against external pressure than on developing a single policy on Myanmar. So I think in conclusion, I would like to say, I have got a few points that I would like to make and some recommendations that I've written down. For the glaring part of it is ASEAN is seen, perception, totally paralyzed. Some people say, more those that are not so kind, say impotent of ASEAN when faced with a serious regional conflict. Two is that there is a dire imperative for ASEAN to reinvent itself. It's ridiculous for us to stay with a policy called non-interference, which lends itself to external power interference. We remember Cambodia, because of non-interference and all sort of thing, the genocide in Cambodia, 2 million people got killed, and we have to have external interference in order to resolve the problem. So I think that is the Myanmar crisis. And now I mentioned Myanmar, I have mentioned some part of the ASEAN's dilemma. Let me now conclude with a few remarks. I think I've got about 7, 8. Is that possible, ma'am?
I think we will have several conversations among ourselves. So I think the first round, Tan Sri, you have provided a very great overview. So everyone is...
Let me just finish conclude by saying that in this one, ASEAN's relevant credibility and also centrality is very much put in question. So I will end there. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Sorry to overstep the time that you have given me. Thank you.
Not at all, Tan Sri. That's some very excellent points that we can get started with. So next, may I have Professor Sufian please unmute and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hu, and I would like to also thank Tan Sri Dr. Syed Ahmed Alba for joining us. This is a very important person with a lot of experience in this ASEAN affairs. And for audience, an adjunct professor at UKM. So welcome. And I would like to also welcome Tuan Iqmal Hazlan, Iqmal Hisham, representing Pemuda UMNO, who may have a different perspective from the political angle. So let me start by saying that I am very much attached to Myanmar. I started going to Myanmar in 2012 at the beginning of the opening up of the economy by the then semi-military, semi-civilian government. And I was asked by an international organization to advise Myanmar. And so I've been advising Myanmar since 2014 on a very serious basis. I go to Myanmar, I went to Myanmar almost every month. I would spend like a week in a month in Myanmar, working with the economic side of the government. In civilian, the semi-military to the civilian government became economically viable by presenting and making and advising them on economic policies. And then later, when Aung San Suu Kyi came into power through NLD, we continued with the engagement with the Myanmar government, and we went on to design economic policies to ensure a sustainable economic development in the country. And I must say that at the beginning of the engagement, I was very surprised by the attitude of the then the government before Aung San Suu Kyi came to power, that they were so keen to develop the country. They were keen to bring in foreign investors. In fact, if we see that the data, one of the most important investors, but in fact, they are actually Burmese diaspora who came back from other countries, from Singapore, from Australia, from Europe, from Malaysia, and they reinvested in their own country because they believed that it was about time for them to bring back the money and reinvest in their home country. And in 2014, we started with the reform process, with the economic reform process, with the new policies. Myanmar joined many of the ASEAN free trade agreements with ASEAN China, ASEAN Korea, ASEAN Australia, New Zealand, to name a few. And then later they joined the RCEP agreement. And then Myanmar also went into negotiation with the European Union to have a bilateral investment treaty to bring in more investors from Europe, but it was the negotiation when Aung San Suu Kyi government couldn't handle the topic, and then all of a sudden we saw the declining interest among foreign investors in Myanmar. However, I would say the credit should go to Japan and Korea and Singapore and many ASEAN countries for helping Myanmar to recover from the long isolation in their economic activities. Like Tan Sri said, Myanmar had an important policy that they could actually live alone without any foreign intervention. They, for a long time, they relied on China to help them with the hard currency. However, we see the statements coming from the Tatmadaw lately that they are no longer just aligning themselves to Myanmar, to China, but they are also looking to align themselves with the Western powers. in order to bring the economy back into the Myanmar people, the people of Myanmar had been very excited with the experiment on democracy. When I went there in 2012, they were looking forward for the elections. And in 2016, 2017, when the new government came into power, I could see the jubilation among the people. I could see the economic development in my monthly trip to the country. I could see the increase in the air traffic, which is an important indicator of economic development and economic relationship with external countries. They even have flights from Emirates, from Qatar, which connect them to the rest of the world. It's not just with China, not just with ASEAN countries. So it shows however, this stopped overnight on the 1st of February 2021. And I spoke with colleagues in Myanmar lately. Last time I spoke with them was last week. They were not very happy. Banks are closed. Even if you have money in the bank, you could not have access to the cash because the cash machines are all closed. And people are becoming very desperate. Not just because they are unhappy, but because they don't have access to the capital that they need most, the child. And this is causing a big problem. Some people who are able and capable have moved out from the central of Yangon. They move out to some other parts of the city in order to have access to a much secure environment. And I must tell you that in my experience, dealing with the economic side, they came to Singapore, in many countries, to do economic promotion. And we were very receptive to the idea of investing and promoting businesses with Myanmar and in Myanmar. However, this will cause a big challenge now, because will ASEAN look at Myanmar as a potential economic contributor? Because of this situation, they have one of the largest stocks of gas in ASEAN. They have, if everything goes well, they can be the largest producer of rice for ASEAN. They are one of the largest producer of fisheries in ASEAN. So this is an important part of ASEAN, not just politically, but also economically. However, it's becoming quite strange. ASEAN has to forget about the policy of non-interference. Like Guterres say, I think I agree with him that the only hope now in this world together with the de facto government in Myanmar to find a solution. Now they said that instead of 1 year, they want to have an election in 2 years. Hopefully they stick to their promise that it's going to be 2 years. That's what they stuck to their promise when they said they were handing over power to Aung San Suu Kyi in the last election. But we have to find a solution. ASEAN has to be brave now. They have to be brave. They have to put their foot down and say, look, this is not good for ASEAN. It's not good for the region, because we are going to have a lot of issues, like we are going to have refugees, we are going to have economic slowdown, we are going to have some issues with agriculture supplies, food chain. And ASEAN cannot just rely on Indonesia or Retno Marsudi, who has a very good relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi. Thailand has to play a role. Thailand is very close with the military government. They are very close to play a big role in getting the Tatmadaw to come on the negotiating table with a good faith, with an open heart, that this is something that needs to be resolved and to be resolved properly. I have traveled around the country, like Tan Sri mentioned. It has never achieved peace since independence in 1948. I have been to probably the most difficult places. I saw conflicts with my own eyes. And so this is a chance, maybe, for them to find a peace and to find a solution, not just about the political conflicts among the two big groups, which is the Tatmadaw and NLD, but also to find peace among the different ethnic groups, the Shan, the Karen, the Kayin, the Chin, and the Rohingya, in order to find a big solution in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sufyan. So I think both Tan Sri and Prof has mentioned about what are the potential solutions. So the second round of the conversation would focus about this. So next we have Mr. Iqmal Haslan. The screen is yours.
Hi everyone. Thank you. Firstly, thank you, Dr. Ku Chiping, Tan Sri, Syed Hamid Alba, Professor Dr. Sufyan, and organizers for having me on today's webinar. I think I'm blessed to have two giant speakers with me around, having them doing the introduction and doing the background. I think it's a privilege to have them talking about Myanmar and ASEAN dilemma today. I'll keep it short because I saw there's 4 questions already lining up at the Q&A. Firstly, I think Myanmar, I agree with Dr. Sufyan, ASEAN needs to be brave. It needs to set its foot down. They're having their discussion on the 24th April in Indonesia. They need to make a certain framework that is workable for Myanmar as soon as possible. Because to me, the longer that we wait, the longer that we crisis will escalate even further. This creates regional instability, many more crises, and involves ASEAN around as a whole. So as Tan Sri has mentioned before, mentioned just now, that we need to establish a certain communication with the current de facto government, with the CPHR, with the CHRP. But I also do believe that we also need to establish with the Tatmadaw, because they're both are infighting. And this crisis needs to establish a certain regulation and communication between two of them. And ASEAN needs to be the center and stability between these two parties, these two stakeholders. So in order for us to, ASEAN needs to enter into its frame, certain communication needs to establish. Before we can see today's from the United Nations by the SecGen has already put and give its way towards ASEAN. They have no way of resolving Myanmar issue. So ASEAN now is in testing form. It's either do or die now, because we've seen before ASEAN has played its role during the crisis in the cyclone Norgis back in 2008, when they convinced international community to help Myanmar during the crisis of the cyclone Norgis. So I believe ASEAN can do that again in order to convince everyone to sit down and establish a certain ground rule for Myanmar. And once ASEAN set its foot down, settle around both parties and stakeholders, only then we can entirely focus on building back Myanmar and not to interfere madly. The longer that we wait, I believe it creates a more regional stability and more great power will come into play. What more if we come into, when we talk about the South China Sea issue, a lot of international power comes into play as well. So in order for us to settle down Myanmar as quickly, ASEAN needs to create a framework, must have its own obligation to solve issues in Myanmar. And I think this has been proven before. If ASEAN can put a certain pressure towards Myanmar, it can be done. And it has already been tested before, back when Myanmar passed its chairmanship of ASEAN back in 2006, because of the pressure made by the ASEAN countries. And ASEAN, we're not that big. We're just 10 of us, 10 plus 3, 10 plus 2. And we have a certain stand towards Myanmar. So I believe this is a certain time. And we need to deal this as ASEAN, not just a triathlon. Because we can see since the coup on the 1st February, the countries that has been talking about the coup is only Malaysia, Indonesia, certain neighbor countries, which because of its refugees issues, countries like who has not been affected has not been talking and making not so much noise. So I think on the 24th April back in Indonesia, when the ASEAN made up, we need to set a certain framework and we need to be brave enough so that Myanmar can do what we are doing, what ASEAN is pressuring is doing. So secondly, on the pressure side, certain sanctions, I believe it's important for us to put on Myanmar. We can put on certain economic sanction, recognition sanctions. There are a lot of sanctions that can be done towards ASEAN, but it has to be coordinated within the ASEAN countries so that the pressure can be felt by the Tamadao and the sanction can only be uplifted once it has returned back to its original Myanmar democracy. So this certain framework is important and it must be, Myanmar must oblige to what ASEAN can demand. That's it from me.
Hey, thank you so much, Iqmal Hazlan, for expressing the urgency for ASEAN to take actions right now. So now we are addressing the ASEAN dilemma in taking such actions. So Iqmal Hazlan, you mentioned about the ASEAN member states should take actions before the other great powers would intervene. But what is the prospect of those member states? So say we are going with the ASEAN minus coalition that would put pressure on Myanmar. What would that be? So secondly, to Prof. Sufian, so I really like how you observe the situation on the ground for the past 8 years, 9 years, and seems like the people are really all for this people's elected government. So if we are going to provide a solution, how can you convince the Myanmar people to accept kind of a partial negotiation or agreement to join hand again with the military to wait until 2 years later to hold the election as requested by the military? Do you think such consensus would eventually be possible? And last but not least, to Tan Sri. So I think you highlighted many important points, and one of it being that ASEAN is divided. And first question is about, should we consider suspend Myanmar's leadership? So as we admitted Myanmar into ASEAN in the mid 1997, we actually trying to convince the Western powers that we would try to socialize Burma at that time, and this membership would enable Burma to change and to prevent them to further falling deeper into China's orbit. So the West actually initially resisted and even protested ASEAN's decision to do so. So would this decision now be considered by ASEAN? So, and also we would like to hear the rest of your recommendations and what are your thoughts for the potential solution. So in the order of the answer questions, can I have Iqmal Hazlan to respond first?
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, that can be a consideration to revoke the membership of Myanmar in ASEAN, because for the past since several years since ASEAN was established, Myanmar to me has not shown an obligation or commitment towards what one ASEAN community is about. We have seen a lot of issues going around in Myanmar, and not just the coup recently. Before this, since the Rohingya issue back in the Rakhine state, a lot of issues that we believe we have discussed and we have put into framework towards Myanmar, nothing has been done. So that should be a consideration to be put forward in the ASEAN discussion. But Brunei as the chairman for the ASEAN needs to be brave enough to put into motion towards all the ASEAN members. But I don't think it won't happen, because Tan Sri would know even further how is ASEAN is going to be. But to me, Doctor, it needs to have its routine. Coming from a youth perspective, since the Myanmar coup, a lot of things has been going backwards, especially for the youth. Since we see the university has closed down, it was back when Aung San Suu Kyi won, the Yangon University opened up for the first time for after a few years, and then new subject topics were put into discussion. International relations, where there were exchange programs, scholarship. There was a lot of activity, economic activity going around since Aung San Suu Kyi won back in Myanmar. But now, when the Tatmadaw have took over, so it seems to me it's going backtracking. So coming from a youth perspective, I think it's a backtracking for the new generation, especially in Myanmar. And you can see during the demonstration, a lot of, especially from the generation side, you can see 40 children were being murdered. Out of the 700 was being murdered. That's quite a huge number for children to participate in a demonstration. So that shows something how actually youth are concerned with what Myanmar democracy is all about. So to me, if Myanmar does not respect what ASEAN believe as one ASEAN community, I think that should be considered hugely. Because if on the 24th of April, if we were to decide a certain framework or a certain discussion, if Myanmar does not abide to it, then what's the point of it? So I think I leave that for discussion.
Thank you. So that segue very well into Prof. Sufyan. So what do you think? Can we reach a solution in which the people, especially the youth, can accept working with the military again?
Thank you very much. It's going to be tough, I think, this time around. Last time people were waiting. They were willing to wait, and they waited, and they got what they wanted. But we must remember that even if there's a situation when we come back to the sort of like normality, it's going to be 25% of the parliament still remain with the Tatmadaw, and 4 of the main ministries will remain with the Tatmadaw. And I suspect even if we agree to an election, some changes will happen. Some faces of NLD may not be there in the next election. So my take is this. I spoke with colleagues in Yangon, and they say they will wait, and people get this thing, all these issues sorted out. NLD is also not without its own issues. There are some weaknesses in NLD. For example, in the last election in November, there were some constituencies who were told not to vote. They were taken off from voting, and that was used validly or invalidly by the military in coming into this intervention. And then it's going to be a lot of negotiations behind the scenes between the military and also the NLD. Mainly, who's going to be the next president? Who's going to be? They don't have the prime minister, so the president was supposed to have the full power, like the one before the NLD. And so who's going? Somehow, somewhere, ASEAN may come up with a solution that someone will be the president, and the president may have a pseudo military power, and then the day-to-day running of the country is left to the elected government. That could be a solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Prof. Sophian, you may want to mute yourself first and see if we can keep the noise. Thank you so much. So next, Tan Sri. So I think both Iqmal Haslan and Prof. Sophian has mentioned about how you also pointed out the civil disobedience is unprecedented. And given the role of ASEAN, do you think suspensions of Myanmar from ASEAN's membership is the way to go? Or is there any solution for the strange bedfellows, as we have talked about at the beginning of this meeting, that Aung San Suu Kyi and her coalition people can walk again with military that somehow has already betrayed them this round? And what are your thinking and potential solution to this kind of scenario?
Thank you, Dr. Hu, for giving me the last speaker after listening to my colleagues. First of all, let me quickly comment on when both of you, Dr. Hu as well as Iqmal, speaks about, you talk about suspension, Iqmal talk about, sacking or expelling Myanmar. I think you have to go back to the charter. Our charter do not have that provision. There is no provision for suspension, for and our charter are mostly lacks enforcement of accountability problem. That's why you see in ICHA, even ICHA only recently they have come up with this. So it's not possible. Sacking or suspending not possible. Two is that on the possible big power involvement. In the case of Myanmar, it's impossible because of the current, we don't see US is satisfied with doing what they are doing at present. China is satisfied with the rule that they are doing, and China and Russia would not allow any intervention. And I think Russia is very close with Myanmar. They have trained about 6,000 engineers, in Russia. So, and they also sell weapons to Myanmar. So there is not. US are not at present anyway, even though there is some offensive realist there will be a war between US and China. I don't think US and China would go along that route. So it's out of the question on big power involvement. So still, the challenge will be finding way for ASEAN, everybody talking about ASEAN. So let me say that. So ASEAN, his first important role is that he has to engage the junta, because this is a Spanish word, it should be junta, and convince them to enter into negotiation with the NUG. But I would like to put a caveat. Both of them are very, have got strong hate on this issue. The NUG have said that they want to root out the military from the union that they are going to form, the government of the union based on a federal system that they are going to form. They will not work. So, but ASEAN's job is to negotiate for reconciliation so that they will be, because there is no way of settlement unless both parties facilitate for a discussion. So, and it is good for the military. I remember when I was going up and down in Myanmar, I find is the most fascinating, not only romantic and the most fascinating, economically, resources, the people. So I told them, it is better for you to be open rather than for you to keep all these things, and the Rohingya issue is not settled. They have been very nice to me. I was able to engage them. So this is the time to me for the summit, when the summit on 24th, to decide on a special envoy to become a facilitator between both parties, between the military and the NUG. So then they can talk with each other. In any settlement, you cannot have direct talk at the initial stage. So ASEAN has to change. In order to do that, ASEAN has to change its way. Firstly, ASEAN must get rid of this principle of non-interference and say this is not non-interference because of the spillover effects, the flow of refugees to our countries. All of us are going to be affected. Not only among ASEAN countries, we are going to have Thailand, we are going to have China. China also not happy. We are going to have India, we are going to have Bangladesh. So everybody is involved in this one. So ASEAN must change. to say, yes, this one is an exception. So the other part of it, I think both of them, Kamal as well as Professor Sufyan mentioned, we cannot afford, at present, all of us are talking about state actors. And UG is considered itself as a state actor, even though they have not de facto de jure, because they are not, even though they won the election, but the government hasn't been formed in law actually. So they must not engage only with the state. ASEAN must start, because ASEAN is state-centered and state-centric. Don't forget. I would like that if they want to, with states, the problem that they face is they are engaging with the Tatmadaw. Tatmadaw is belligerent and committing acts of brutal violence against unarmed civilians. How are you going to, only deal with them? So ASEAN has not. I think it's the first time. Iqmal talked about youth. I think it's the first time ASEAN must engage itself with the people. So the people of Myanmar actually are worried that ASEAN will betray them and ultimately legitimize the junta at this coming summit. There is a concern of the and now I think they are at the summit. I think they can decide on the. I have got 5 issues that I think they could decide. I will just do it very quickly. First of all, the summit should be on the agenda of the summit. I think they should include the safety and protection of the civilian population from Myanmar. It must be top priority. And I think the strong statement is not going to stop this pattern. It must be very clear that Myanmar will face consequences if the violent repression against civilians does not stop. So this one. Second, ASEAN should offer itself a mediation role through a special envoy. So a high-level figure from ASEAN member that is acceptable to all sides, acceptable to Tatmadaw, as well as acceptable to NUG, to bring the parties to the negotiating table. And they then, the 2 years and also I think, they talk about 1 year and now 2 years. I believe that if there is nothing happen, it's not going to be 2 years, it's going to be forever. And they might. So if you have this map to resolve the crisis, how are they going to move to the democracy? And the third one, the roadmap, I think, before I go, the roadmap, the substantive part of the roadmap, there must be, is the election, for new election. And there is a chance to consult probably with all parties. They want to, because the Tatmadaw say they want to hold election. They must consult with all parties before they can hold election. So the roadmap must be clear. How are the consultation going to be done? The third one, ASEAN should ask Tatmadaw for a humanitarian pause. That means there is a need to be implemented throughout the country. So ASEAN itself must activate the ASEAN Emergency Response Assessment Team, that is IRAT, to be deployed to conduct a rapid needs assessment along the Thai-Myanmar border, where tens of thousands are displaced, and for humanitarian assistance. And through the United Nations, Red Cross, and humanitarian NGOs. And I think this proposal should include the deployment of civilian monitors from ASEAN countries to ensure that aid is delivered effectively. At present, they have a problem because everything is at an end. I think the next one that I want to say, the last one, you're very happy, Dr. Hu. I'm going to conclude. In addition, I think ASEAN member state, this has always been a problem, even in Malaysia. ASEAN member state should agree to offer refugee and protection to all those fleeing Myanmar, including the ethnic Karen, Kachin, as well as the Rohingya. Since, as you know, the planned repatriation efforts in the Rakhine state will be further stalled because of the coup. So everybody has forgotten about the Rohingya, the humanitarian crime against humanity, and UN report of possible genocide, and also I think ICJ and ICC, Tom Andrews say should be referred to ICC, what is happening today. So for safety, this is for safety. And the ASEAN Secretariat, I think, should prepare guideline for ASEAN member state on refugee reception arrangements. This must be structured properly. Registration, non-refoulement, and referral mechanism for vulnerable groups such as elderly person, pregnant women, children, and also unaccompanied minors. So I think all ASEAN member states should agree to postpone. I think anyway, they should not deport Myanmar national until a resolution of this crisis. You know, when people run from oppression, from violence, under international law, strictly, you can't deport them back. So you must protect them. So this, I think all this, what I have referred to just now, does not affect the non-interference policy. The only thing is ASEAN has to be innovative, creative, and borrowing the word of Professor Sufyan, ASEAN must be brave. In other words, it must think out of the box. It cannot think in the normal way. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So much food for thought here. So I really delighted with some of your answers already. Answered some of the questions from the audience. One of it though, from Vincent Chong. So from his observation for the past 2 months, the junta seems to be reluctant to engage with ASEAN. And we are going to have an ASEAN Special Summit very soon. So do you think Tatmadaw is ready to talk with that special summit?
I think actually to be, not to, to answer to that question directly, the informal ASEAN foreign ministers meeting was held. ICHA was held. Chairman's statement was there. And Ratno was able to see their representative, in charge of foreign affairs. So it's not quite true that the Tatmadaw do not want, because they know the consequences of them if they cut off ASEAN. So Ratno has been doing a good work. And I think now what we need is for it to proceed further. That is, ASEAN must not be seen as a partisan broker of peace or reconciliation or negotiation. ASEAN must be seen to see Myanmar and the whole region is peaceful in insecurity. We are not facing, turmoil as a result of Myanmar crisis. So I think that's why the special envoy to me is a very important factor. Someone that is acceptable. I thought Indonesia has always been close with Myanmar. So I thought somebody from Indonesia, they have been conducting a workshop on democracy, they have built schools, they've always been able to engage. So get somebody, whoever ASEAN can agree to become the facilitator of negotiation and subsequently, hopefully, the roadmap towards peace and free election and democracy.
Thank you so much. So that actually lead right next to the next question from Eric Paulson.
Can I answer Vincent's question?
Prof. Sufyan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think the military has been reaching out, not just to ASEAN, but also to other parts of the world, because they are feeling the pinch of the economically they are not doing well. So from what I gather, they have also been reaching out to some international organizations looking for solutions in this situation. Because for the past many years, since the opening up of the economy, the country has been prospering, and all of a sudden they see overnight economy is not doing well at all. So I think when money talks, we can find a solution. And here, Guterres has given up on the UN, so the bulk of the issue lies with ASEAN. And here I see Indonesia, just like the Tan Sri, Indonesia has a big role to play in Myanmar. But I know the junta and some parts of them have been reaching out to other parts of the world looking for solutions.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sufyan, for adding that perspective. So next is someone is wondering about Tan Sri's previous experience in dealing and negotiating with the Tatmadaw when you are ASEAN and OIC envoy to Myanmar. So can you share some of your skills with the incoming special envoy to Myanmar, which hopefully would be the case?
When I to behave as a negotiator, you must come with a white sheet, blank paper. You must not have predetermined or preconceived views, who is wrong and who is right. So in this particular case, you must see what is the solution. And I was very close with the military actually from Tam Shui. I was, he spoke a lot to me about even the conversion of Myanmar, the system that they should adopt. And we work very closely with the military intelligence of Myanmar. When I went to as a special envoy, and this was because of Aung San Suu Kyi. The only thing is they asked us to refrain from treating Aung San Suu Kyi. Therefore, we should not see as ASEAN. We should see Aung San Suu Kyi at that time as a leader when you have got a senior general as the leader. So you need to balance. There is a lot of equilibrium that you have to find. But I think the most important thing is you must remember that Tatmadaw is a problem as well as a solution. Do not give the impression to the people that you can replace the Tatmadaw. My view is that you must find both, must find a way to converge. Their views must converge. What are they interested? They are interested in a free, democratic, and I hope inclusive Myanmar, where everyone is given a chance. So that's how I even when I was special envoy of OIC, I met everybody. I met from the military, from the police. When I went round to Sitwe, they escorted me with their, So I met the AG. So everyone was very cooperative, even when they were very angry with according to them, they were see because they think that I will for met the leaders, extreme leaders as well as the Malayan leaders. I met the human rights group of Myanmar, who are government body. So all these things, I think you need somebody that can say, okay, let us talk. There is no way you can settle this without talking, without communicating, without sitting at the table. So that's my view. That's my own experience. Even when I went to Israel, to Palestine, I mean to speak with the in the occupied territories. Okay, that's my view.
That's
I hope I answered the
precious
question.
experience sharing. So thank you so much for that. So next from Ben, asking about from a human security perspective, how does Myanmar crisis affect ASEAN's people-centeredness and what can be done to prioritize the people-oriented and people-centered commitment? So maybe I would like to have Mr. Iqmal Haslan to tackle this question first.
From human security perspective, how does thank you, Ben. I think maybe Tan Sri can add in more. He's more experienced than me, but I do agree sometimes with Tan Sri. Just now when you mentioned about suspension or the sackingness of Myanmar from ASEAN, it can't be done. But there are certain ways that we can, however, shadow it. That's why I mentioned certain sanctions that can be done, because right now, to me, Tatmadaw is on its first appearance towards the Foreign Summit. So during the first appearance, it's up to ASEAN whether to acknowledge its presence or not. So there's two counterparts, two weighing part on this matter, whether we want to acknowledge Tatmadaw or whether we want to acknowledge the UAG or the CHRP. So to me, this is a pinnacle point where we need to acknowledge, because whoever that ASEAN comes to invite or whoever sits on the picture holding hands, that will be the point of people engagement globally that we'll be speaking of. So in order for ASEAN to play a certain role, to be brave enough, to me, both parties needs to attend at the ASEAN community. And through that, only that we can discuss towards any humanitarian impacts, the economic implications, and how the regional security affects. Yes, it does play a very, very important role towards on the 23rd, because we can see the foreign ministers meeting has been done before. They have met before, but yet the killings never stop. And today the killings are still ongoing. And so to me, in order for us to put a certain towards Myanmar, to tell Myanmar that this needs to stop, certain bold action are needed to be done to be towards ASEAN, because right now the ball is on ASEAN, and the creativeness, the discussion towards ASEAN on how we want to tackle Myanmar, especially on their citizenship, on their citizens, is on the 24th of this April. Yes, I do believe that we can help certain refugees running away from Myanmar, but as we know, Malaysia did not sign the 1951 United Nations Convention, or we call it 1967 Protocol, and despite that lack of rectification, we still hold the largest refugees numbers in Southeast Asia, and the fourth largest in the world. So that shows something as a Malaysian as a whole. And this refugee, if you look at certain statement, it requires cost. And how do we define this? How do we play around this? Yes, we can accept refugees, but to what extent? If the accepting refugees only involve extension towards Malaysia and Indonesia just primarily, then there's no point discussing towards in ASEAN. So this needs to put a certain threshold. Perhaps we can divide certain refugees, so in order that Myanmar citizens are being kept safe. So I think this is important. The next week meeting is important, but it needs to be realistic enough for us to push ASEAN to define what is the current situation for Myanmar.
Okay, thank you. Does Tan Sri or Prof have any added views on this?
Yeah, I have one issue. I have no problem. I mean, I think refugees. Yes, we have now refugees. We have refugees coming out from Myanmar now to Thailand, to India, Bangladesh, China, and we have a number of Myanmar people who are still in Malaysia who are supposed not. I agree they are not supposed to be sent back, but we must remember those who are inside Myanmar. How do we go about assisting them? You know. Even if banks are open, they have no access to the money. So, and at the moment with this COVID crisis, the economy is going bad. The health sector is also going bad. They don't have that many ICU beds. They are not able to get people on public health care. Not many people are taking up the vaccines. So we are not just talking about people outside of the country. We must also be able to help those inside the country to overcome their day-to-day problems. These are, I think, the main issues, because if we don't help them in their own country, that will trickle out of the border.
That's true. And in fact, on the eve of the so-called coup or emergency, the vaccine was actually supposed to be delivered to Myanmar. So upon the 1st of February declaration of emergency by the Tatmadaw, so it's actually not delivered inside Myanmar right now. So there is
they have got the vaccines now. They have got the vaccines.
Right.
That's what I heard, but not many people are taking it up.
Right. So that's very unfortunate.
But can I just say something? You see, I specifically mentioned about the humanitarian pause. When I talk about the humanitarian pause, it's not external movement or migration to outside Myanmar. This is within Myanmar. In order to do this, ASEAN Emergency Response Team, IRAT, that I mentioned, should be deployed there to conduct a rapid needs assessment among the time, that is outside at the border as well as in Myanmar itself. So then the Red Cross should be allowed in, United Nations, humanitarian NGOs to help. You cannot revive the economy. There is impossible to revive economy in a country where there is turbulence. And I tend to think that at present, most important thing is forget about these Najis. Najis, 140,000 people were killed because of the desire about the humanitarian the weather, the Taufan. Yeah. So it's a lot of people that died, and Myanmar was ultimately forced to accept because there was going to be international aids coming in, humanitarian aids coming in. And then ASEAN come in. Surin, I remember Surin once mentioning, let ASEAN do what the international, ASEAN be the secretariat. So that's how Najis and Myanmar agreed to that. Myanmar, walaupun Professor Sufyan kata Myanmar looking at other external, but they are very sensitive and suspicious of people outside their country. And I think economically, yes, there may be need, but they do not want people to solve their problem. So they are willing to discuss I believe in a quiet diplomacy. You must do quiet diplomacy. You must meet all these people. And this people-centered ASEAN, it's our declaration. We have got 3 pillars of ASEAN. One of them is the pillar, social cultural pillar. One of the social culture pillar is to establish a people-centered ASEAN. We are far from achieving this. ASEAN is still very state-centered institutions, still state-centered body, all decided by the state. And on top of that, ASEAN's biggest problem is they are generally, countries in ASEAN are not practicing true democracy. So Indonesia, they went through difficult period and they have done very well. Malaysia, we have got some democracy because after this, because of the COVID, we have tested on a different mode. I also do not like democracy to be as defined by the West. I think if you look at the Greek democracy, the democracy is also very limited. There's only a certain group that can vote. Women cannot vote. If non-senatorial, the Praetorian cannot vote. So democracy has got colors and shades. So let us not try to emulate the Westminster or America. Even American democracy is flawed. All these things. So it's not something that we want to discuss. But the most important thing is to convince both sides for them to soften. It's a question of softening position. That's what it's all about. To find a solution, there must be a softening position. The NUG, yes, they have got the support of people. They are the one that got the mandate in the election. But you do not have de jure, you do not have de facto because you are not in office. You cannot take your oath and all sorts. You swear outside it. You're not. And I don't think you can invite NUG to the summit. This is a summit. You have to take a summit. It's not, there will be no holding hand. This is an emergency summit. There will be no, fold sama masing-masing. There will not be that. But I think the most important thing is the de facto has to come. It's not a negotiating meeting. Please remember, this is not a negotiating summit. If you bring both parties, the summit will not take place. So I think we have to be pragmatic. That's why Malaysia's foreign policy is based on principle, consistency, and pragmatism. Pragmatism is an important element in trying to solve this type of problem. So I believe that the best thing is you must convey a message to the military that ASEAN does not accept the coup. ASEAN wants a true democracy. Myanmar has started in 2015, 2020. Now let's go back and let us form a government of converging views to try to form a workable, a workable government for the sake of the people of Myanmar. And I think NUG must realize that if they continue like this, if Myanmar become a failed state, and you must remember, 6 million Syrians became refugees. There is no such thing of in you limiting, oh, I want to take so much refugees. Refugees are people running away from violence, from problems, and so on. They just go to whatever place. This is not only a problem of ASEAN, it's a problem of the whole international problem. South Asia is going to be affected. Geopolitically is going to be affected. So the solution is Myanmar must start working. So to start working, both sides must get together and give up some of the belligerent and stringent view. I know Dr. Zani of FOSI doesn't like my view on this one, that he wants to call. To me, you have to be practical. You panggil the other party, there is no meeting. So it's just practicality. Have this first, and then we can send our message to, you are not acceptable, but we have to accept you because you are in power. And then we set the terms. These are the things that we want you to do. So it's up to us to, we will convey some of the views that I've expressed, we'll convey to the government through the foreign minister and when the prime minister, so that, we can contribute in whatever way, because I've established an international, an advisory group where our intention is to focus just on Myanmar, consisting of business people, NGOs, is non-partisan, it's nothing to do with politics, it's just interested in Myanmar and seeing ASEAN does not suffer as a result of Myanmar. Okay, thank you.
Thanks
Sorry,
so
Dr. Ho.
Dr. Ho, can I support? Can I just, I personally think that the summit on the 24th should go ahead. Point, and then we will find a solution. But both sides, especially the NLD, jangan degil. We have a problem with some people who are degil. I work there. I know the people there. I know how they behave. When they become degil, that's a problem. So we must, both sides must come to a conclusion that, look, this is for the good of the people, not just for the good of few people, but for the whole of Myanmar. That's important. And we must also think that if they cannot resolve these two issues, these two groups, how else they can resolve the Kachin, the Karen, the Chin, the Shan, the Rohingya? The whole country is actually in a mess for the past, since 1948. So they have to get these two groups together in order to get the whole country.
Okay, I just have one point that I want to mention, Professor.
Yeah.
Since you talk about the Gil, kan? I know Suu Kyi quite well. I think now the current coup and the current crisis, to me, is beyond Suu Kyi. So the most important thing is now they have found a leader. Suu Kyi also, when she was leading, she was getting a bit iron-fisted, It's not easy to discuss with her. So I think...
I agree with you, Tan Sri.
That Madao, I don't think will trust Suu Kyi. So if they want to find a solution, they must work not for Suu Kyi. Suu Kyi may come in, but not for Suu Kyi, but to find a solution where convergent for them to have a workable Myanmar, where economically they have started the road, and that road, that path must be pursued in earnest in order for Myanmar to be one of the best countries in ASEAN. And I think they are capable of doing that. So I hope so. And stop the violence. I think most importantly, ASEAN summit, an emergency summit, must be able to stop violence. Stop violence. That's why my own view, initially my own view, and this view is not supported by many people or in Myanmar. I like R2P because under international law, under I think Chapter 6 or Chapter 7, United Nations, right to protection is, is not intended for military, so that it can become, but no country that is in conflict trusts this, because of the records of some of the peacekeepers, of people who have come in. So even in Bosnia, there are a lot of issues that we should, we should see what has happened. So it is good that Myanmar, if we hope at this meeting, Myanmar will agree to stop violence, to take a pause, see the humanitarian thing, allow UN envoy. UN has appointed, Guterres has appointed envoy, allow the envoy, ASEAN should insist that envoy should be in, so that there will be acceptability by the international community. The international community is keen to help Myanmar economically to recover and also other things. So Myanmar must take this opportunity, which means that Madao and NUG must work together, and together with all the other minorities. They have formed the unity government. It includes other minorities. Unfortunately, they excluded the Rohingya. Okay, that's
please
what
include us in
think
your advisory group to the Prime Minister. IKMAS is, we are keen to contribute to this discussion.
No, we are not. Okay, I will let them know. But we are not. We are not advisor to the Prime Minister, but
agree. Yeah. Just independent.
But we do not want. We do not want a name for ourselves. It's just we want to do work for the sake of our country, and we were the top in ASEAN, and I think we still can be the top, contributing so many things. And I think at ICHA, Eric has done quite well in speaking for Malaysia on issues of human rights violation and so on. Okay, inshallah, kita tengok.
Thanks
Okay,
so much.
thank you.
So the next aspect of the discussion from Muhammad Ridwan Ayub from Malaysian Armed Forces Defence College. So this is going to be a spill of economic spillover impact on ASEAN. So perhaps I would lead this to Professor Sufyan. So what is your opinion about the supply chain and also economic connectivity from Myanmar to the rest of ASEAN? So will we face any impact coming out of this crisis?
Okay, I must say that one of the ministers appointed by the junta when they took power was the permanent secretary of the Ministry of International Economic Relations. And they were looking forward to all these economic activities. In fact, during the Suchi's government, he was one of the main drivers for the investment into Myanmar. So, but the Myanmar economy is not well connected as part of the supply chain. A lot of investors coming to Myanmar, not because of the export, but rather because of the big market. They have about 50 million people in Myanmar. So, fortunately or unfortunately, this crisis may not contribute that much to the overall economic situation in ASEAN. That's what I can say at this stage.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing, Dr. Ho?
Please.
From the question, I think another thing we must not forget. I mentioned just now that the military is an important force and dominant force in Myanmar. I believe that when we want to negotiate, you have to negotiate through military. We used to do that before. Malaysia, we used, So I think it is important that we make use of our military, through military, in order for them to work together and to see what is the best outcome of it. How do you go about it? I think they have more trust among themselves, like in Thailand and the military, and even in Malaysia, they have got also the retired generals association. among the ASEAN retired general chief. These people, they have got a role to play. And I think they should play because they understand each other. The military psychology, the military leadership role, the management style, how they look at things. You know, in ASEAN, don't forget, you know, there is such a thing as jaga muka, face saving. These are very important cultural facts. That's why ASEAN step by step, non-interference, we must not do this, we must not do that. Because of untuk menjaga air muka orang. To take care of which the Europeans find difficulty. When in our meeting, we are more polite than in the EU meeting, according to the minister from EU told me. You know, you are very polite. In our meeting, we are very, you know, we are just like the Chatham House rule. In the ASEAN meeting, it's very, very polite. We are careful about our language, our semantics is very, very cautious, so that we will not hurt each other. But this time, if we keep on playing like that, then we may not find a solution. Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thank you so much. And related to trade and economy, so the anonymous attendee actually asked about the sanctions. So can sanctions against the military junta and their associates be effective in resolving this crisis?
Can I answer that one? In the first place, let me say that I am a non-believer of sanction, because I believe sanction will hurt the people. So, and then ASEAN cannot sanction, you know, there is no provision for sanction in ASEAN among each other. We have to follow United Nations, that will break up ASEAN, you know, as a body. And then I think what they are doing, which is effective, you ask a question, you're an unknown caller or, you know, questioner, ask a question whether targeted sanction is having effect. Is having effect because most of the businesses are controlled by the military, either through institution or through the individuals. All this to what is happening by the sanction of the UK, US, and EU is having effect on them. And I think also the sanction on the military hardware. But military hardware, you can always find alternative because there are countries that are willing to supply. So I think sanction, yes and no. Target sanction, if general sanction, I don't think it's going to work, but I think targeted sanction will work. And this means all countries must work together within ASEAN also if you want to have targeted sanction, because some of them keep their monies and their properties in ASEAN countries, the military. So you need to, can work, but only to a limited extent. But we must find a solution. That is the most important thing.
I don't think sanctions will work here, general sanctions, because it will affect, in fact, it has already affected the general public in Myanmar. Because the coup, the changeover of the government happened all of a sudden. And all of a sudden there's sanction. People were not prepared in terms of moving money. Some people need to be paid into Myanmar. Some Myanmar people need to pay out their suppliers. And all of a sudden it stopped overnight. So the sudden stoppage of it's not going to affect the military companies as a whole. So I think the international community really need to think about what is the best way of solving this problem, not through general economic sanctions, which is generally affecting the whole population.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sufian. Mr. Iqmal Hazlan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I do agree with both our speaker. General sanction, it's a bit much, but I do believe coordinating sanction can be a bit something that we can discuss, especially when we dealing with military. I think arms embargo, where we can stop military fuel, weaponaries into the country, can be benefiting, but the economy wise, it needs to be continued. Because to me, military brutality takeaways mean of a reign of control if we take away their weaponry. So right now, Myanmar is on the pinch of whether to the current Tamadao de facto leader wants to revive back the economy to show that they are working government through force. So in order to pull in this force, we must take in the arms embargo sanction, so that there won't be, it will benefit the country, and also less violence at the country. So and this also sends a signal to Myanmar that many countries are willingly to show they are brave enough to show certain sanctions towards Myanmar. So to me, general sanctions such as economy shouldn't be happening, but armory, weaponry sanction can be done to show that we can, this global community, this ASEAN community, global community can be done. And I think the United Nations Security Council also have a say. Just now, Tan Sri mentioned about the R2P, request for protection. I mean, that's a very good point. Military intervention. So when we have these certain weaponry sanctions and R2P comes into place, that can be something can be done towards Myanmar certain situation right now.
Can I just mention, I think if you look at the economy of Myanmar, which is having an effect, their export of petroleum gases and other gaseous hydrocarbons, including natural gas, is 3.3 billion US in 2020, about 20% of Myanmar's export. And Thailand accounts for 1.8 billion and China for 1.5 billion export. So it's very big. And then the defense budget is 3 billion. So the military will be worried if all this money that they used to have, they don't have. It is important that we see that, something is done. It is in their interest to see that we can solve the problem. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. I think that's a really important thing to think about, because there is a oil gas pipeline between Myanmar, India, and also Myanmar, China. So definitely those countries are eyeing. And I just read the news that Prime Minister of Thailand, Prayut, has decided not to attend the special summit. So they will send a foreign minister instead. But General Min Aung Hlaing will be there. So
yes,
yeah, I suspected as much.
Good. That's right. I think important factor. So if Thailand don't, but anyway, they attend the foreign, something can be done. Madrid is breaking ranks, breaking rank. But I think Prayut is breaking rank, but combining with his military friend in Myanmar, because Liang, he takes a lot of inspiration from Prayut. He himself mentioned that. So I think I think if Prayut attends, then he could contribute to finding a solution to the current problem. If it doesn't attend, I think that is a signal or indicator. But anyway, we wish the summit all the best.
how about
the Thailand is a very important player here, because he has is very closely linked to Myanmar, not just about the people but also their economy, trade. They have a huge border trade between the two countries. People cross the borders without any passports, and it's a bit disappointing for Prayut Chan-o-cha not to attend. I hope the other leaders will take this matter very seriously to find a solution, and for Indonesia to play a very, very big role here.
No, I just want to say that this is what Prayut said to Nikkei on April 9. He says that Thailand and ASEAN hope that violent incident may end from all sides and there is a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. So, I mean, everybody talk about peaceful resolution, but in order to achieve peaceful resolution, there must be action. We have enough statements, we have enough words, but we need action now. Thank you.
Okay, so there are two more questions. So first is about raising, Tan Sri's mentioned about ASEAN's relevance, credibility, and centrality has been put into question. So I think what we have just talked about is highly relevant here. So how can the founding member states of ASEAN manage this better so that we can preempt future regional conflicts like this to re-emerge again? The lack of leadership may be one of the problems in this region?
I think well, in my view, the leadership in ASEAN has to be played by the biggest country in ASEAN, and that is Indonesia. Indonesia has to play a leader. Malaysia used to play a very good leadership role, but now I think we can support Indonesia, and I think Singapore has always been on balance. They are always looked as a good boy by all sides, because of their, I think, clever diplomacy on this issue. But I think for ASEAN, there is no difference between whether you are founding member or you are subsequent members. You have got the same right, you are governed by the same charter. But the thing is, the passion for the organization may be different. The culturalization towards the organization may be different. We have never been able to get Myanmar to internalize ASEAN, to make, that's why we have the three pillars. We want to make ASEAN feel, ASEAN population feels what the European feels, the members of the European Union. Not legalistic, but they feel European. ASEAN don't feel ASEAN, we feel all individual countries. So then we suggested that each university should have the ASEAN languages as part of the, you must learn. And we do not have connectivity anyway. The air connectivity, direct connectivity between ASEAN countries is very poor. If you compare, so all these things are I think, work in progress. That has to be. So we need Myanmar, if part of South Asia, an important member of South Asia, to be there and play towards build, the building of ASEAN, and Myanmar shouldn't be one could influence Myanmar. I believe that Thailand could influence, because they have got the biggest number of Myanmar citizens who are refugees and whose stateless position has not been determined. And there is a lot of exploitation whenever there is, and I do not want also Thailand, when they see that there are too much refugees, they open up and let come to the best place to come is to Malaysia. You might remember that in Malaysia, we do not only have Rohingya, we have got all other nationalities of Myanmar ethnic groups in Malaysia, so as refugees, because they all run from either economic plight or from oppression or repression, whatever we want to say. Just now, I think Iqmal mentioned about the refugee, the Refugee Convention, 1951 or the 1967 Protocol. I think these are legal instruments. But remember that as a member of the United Nations, there are other protocols that you are governed with, like the children, which we sign, women, which we, so, or people under the international law of the sea. You cannot move ships away, not to on shore, if they run away from oppression and oppression or violence. So all these are the things that we must be more au fait and understand what's happening. Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much. And the last questions from the audience come in two parts. So firstly is how to leverage ASEAN's ties with Myanmar to ensure that junta would be committed to whatever negotiation outcome that is going to be. Secondly is activating ASEAN High Commission or Troika a viable solution. for the long term of this problem? Prof. Sufyan.
Yeah, I think to Jakarta, that's a very good sign that he's willing to come and talk to all other ASEAN leaders. And we will look for consensus among ASEAN, who's going to be the lead. So here, yeah, you may use the term High Commission, Troika, whatever, but it has to be a mediator, someone who will be able to play the constructive engagement role to ensure that everybody comes on the same table or on a different table, but to find a solution. And I think if we must find out from the senior general, okay, what is the main problem? What's your main problem? Why did you do this? And then we find out from the other side, okay, how do you think to be able to, what do you think that it could, what can contribute to the solution of the problems? Then, if we don't ask them a question and we don't find a solution, then it's going to be a problem. So ASEAN must be willing to, yes, we have to be diplomatic, but we have to be quite straightforward in terms of what kind of questions that need to be asked and what are the solutions that need to be put on the table. So here, I think in addition to the UN Special Envoy, we must have an ASEAN Special Envoy. It may not be a minister, but he has to be someone which both sides can actually speak, willing to speak and willing to trust that particular person.
I think we are also recommending for first to allow, because for UN they have already appointed their special envoy, but to allow the UN special envoy. In my earlier statement, in my intervention, I mentioned about ASEAN special envoy is necessary. I think the most important thing is it must be, my caveat is that it must be acceptable by both sides. And I think there must be a capital, most probably Jakarta maybe, that now they should call both sides informally to meet separately. Tatmadaw and then representative for energy. Have a scripting between them. And you can formulate what needs to be done. I think insofar as Tatmadaw is concerned, they know why they have called for the emergency. The answer is fraud. Actually, in actual fact, it is what they are worried is that when Aung San Suu Kyi talk about there will be new constitution that they are going to, they are worried about them losing their status and power, even the 25% or the 4 important ministries, because they think that maybe Aung San Suu Kyi has not kept a part of the bargain. And they have done so. This is my final remarks on this. They have done so. I think this is unexpected. They have done so after they have made Suu Kyi lost her influence and lost her iconic position internationally. So it is easier for them. Suu Kyi was not the great person who is loved by everyone, who the West would defend because of the, and she defended the, Suu Kyi went to defend the genocide in ICJ hearing in The Hague. But that made her more popular with the people. That made the military more fearful of her. So all these things, that whoever is a special envoy must be a person who get rid of the fear, the psychology of fear, and must have a very reconciliatory way of building confidence. These are confidence building measures, the CBMs that you need to do. Well, now is the time for you to have some other tracks like you are doing now. But the government tracks are equally important to meet both sides on an informal basis. That's what we did when we were doing the Mindanao peace process. It's all done with different tracks. Then inshallah, if we are serious enough, ASEAN is serious enough, then ASEAN's credibility and centrality will not be questioned, our relevance will not be questioned. Otherwise, it becomes another talking shop, you know, making a lot of statements, but no action. But I love ASEAN anyway. Thank you.
I'm actually very optimistic about the ASEAN. I think this time around they will find a solution. Having been there many years, working in Myanmar, looking at both sides. I started with the military government, ended up with the civilian government. Power in 2016, which they did. So I hope this time around they will hand over power at the end of the, hopefully within the next 2 years. They will hold an election, and that is a very important step, because the people of Myanmar had been looking forward to be part of the overall international community. They have been looking forward to the freedom that they were enjoying when this thing happened. So I just hope that ASEAN will be serious in playing its role this time around. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sufyan, and also Tan Sri for the concluding remarks. So last but not least, Mr. Iqmal Haslan.
We're going into conclusion, is it? Yeah, so I think as regarding the last question, I think they both has mentioned about it. It's good enough already. So no need to add on. Just for as part of the conclusion, I think this on the 24th April is important. ASEAN needs to be brave. It needs to put a certain framework, and to whomever they invite or whoever comes in, they need to honor what is being responsible to them when they go back to their respective countries. And this issue needs to be resolved as quickly as possible. Certain international speakers says just to wait it out. Aung San Suu Kyi waited out for 15 years. We can wait another 4 more years, but to me, it needs to be resolved as quickly as possible for the region to be more stable, to be more peaceful, and then security issues can be done within ASEAN. Even the United Nations has passed on the baton to ASEAN. So this gives a great advantage and great privilege for ASEAN to step forward to show what ASEAN can do, as Tan Sri mentioned, as a state-centric approach towards its members. So hopefully on this 24th April, we can come to a certain conclusion. We can see back the region coming back to its original state. Maybe not the 24th April, but a certain step forward, moving towards ASEAN as one ASEAN community.
Thank you all so much. So allow me to conclude this forum by thanking kindly Tan Sri Dr. Syed Hamid Alba, Professor Dr. Sufyan, and also Mr. Iqmal Haslan. So all of which have contributed their experience, their thought, and also the best wishes for Myanmar. We have talked about the political situation, the military institution, first and foremost, and also the people, economy aspect of the crisis, and also the societal and the people dimension of this conflict. So I personally also have researcher friends from Myanmar who are of Karen, Kachin, Chin ethnics, and some of them were actually seen on Facebook, highly emotional, of course, and also some of them are trying to gather donation for their ethnic minority armed groups. So this situation really is the worst case scenario in which the civil war will outbreak in Myanmar is the least we want to see. So we hope the coming meeting will provide some the soft landing for the current crisis. De-escalation is very much welcome, and hopefully ASEAN will live up to its expectation to be a regional institution that we can all rely on, less of a talk shop, and also taking more action. Thank you all so much, and thank you to all the audience who's staying through with us. And it is late afternoon now, so I wish you a selamat berbuka later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Thank you, Iqmal.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you.
Oh,
Bye. Assalamualaikum.
Salam warahmatullahi.